Somewhere in Epirus, around 285 BC, a philosopher is trying to talk a king out of a war. Not this war specifically. Every war. All of them. The ones that haven't happened yet and the ones that are already being planned in the back of Pyrrhus's mind while he listens with the patience of a man who has decided he will do what he wants regardless of what anyone says. Cineas, the Thessalian philosopher, the best diplomat in the Greek world, the man Pyrrhus trusts more than anyone alive, lays it out slowly. Tell me, sire. After Italy, what then? Pyrrhus says Sicily. And after Sicily? Libya, Carthage, the Western Mediterranean. And then Greece, Macedonia. The whole Greek world unified under Epirus. And then we rest. Then we enjoy ourselves. Banquets, conversation. The things that make life worth living. Cineas is quiet for a moment. Then he says, what prevents us from doing that right now? We have Epirus. We have peace. We have wine. We have each other's company. What exactly are we waiting for? Pyrrhus has no answer. He also never changes his plans. That conversation, recorded by Plutarch, echoed by every historian who has written about Pyrrhus since, is the key to everything. It tells you exactly who this man is. He knows the argument against what he's doing. He understands it completely. He simply cannot stop. This episode is about the decade in which Pyrrhus builds the thing he cannot stop feeding. The army, the kingdom, the reputation, the war machine that will cross the Adriatic and make Rome question its own future. Last episode we left Pyrrhus at 23, sole king of Epirus, one political assassination already behind him, a kingdom that was his for the first time without conditions or co-regents. This episode covers the decade that turns him from a regional king into the most feared general in the Greek world. Subscribe if you haven't and let's continue. 295 BC. Pyrrhus is 23 years old and king of a territory that is, by the standards of the Hellenistic world, modest. Epirus has warriors. It has mountains that function as natural defenses. It has a coastline on the Ionian Sea. What it does not have is the population base of Macedonia, the wealth of Egypt, or the administrative infrastructure of the Seleucid Empire. What it has is Pyrrhus. And Pyrrhus, in these years, turns out to be a remarkably capable peacetime ruler. This surprises people. The image of him that history has preserved is almost entirely military. The general, the tactician, the man who throws himself into the front lines of every battle. But the sources that cover this period describe a king who governs with genuine attention, who is generous to his subjects, who is accessible in a way that Greek kings were not always required to be. Plutarch notes that Pyrrhus held open audiences, that common citizens could approach him directly with complaints and requests, that he dealt with these personally rather than delegating them to administrators who would have forgotten the petitioner before they reached the palace gates. This is not purely altruism. Pyrrhus understands something that many ambitious men don't, that an army is only as good as the kingdom behind it. That soldiers who know their families are well governed fight differently than soldiers who are fighting for a man who treats their home as a resource to be extracted. He expands the kingdom strategically. Through a combination of war and marriage, he will take multiple wives in these years, each one a diplomatic calculation, each union a treaty written in human terms. Pyrrhus extends Epirus into parts of Macedonia and Thessaly. At its peak, his domain controls 400 kilometers of Balkan coastline. He secures his borders. He defeats Illyrian incursions from the north. He manages the complicated politics of the Greek city-states to his south, who are perpetually either asking him for help or complaining about him depending on the season. And he builds. The army Pyrrhus builds in these years is the project that outlives everything else he does. Not in the sense that it survives him, it doesn't, not as a coherent force. But in the sense that the tactical innovations he introduces become part of the vocabulary of ancient warfare in ways that Rome itself will eventually absorb. Start with what he inherits. The Macedonian phalanx is the foundation, a wall of soldiers 16 ranks deep, each armed with an 18-foot sarissa pike, moving in formation like a single organism. At its best, on flat ground, it is essentially unstoppable. Nothing in the ancient world can break a properly formed phalanx from the front. The problem is the front. The phalanx requires flat ground to function. It requires its flanks to be protected. It requires the enemy to cooperate by standing in front of it rather than going around it. In the complex terrain of Italy, fighting against an army, Rome's legions, specifically designed to be flexible and adaptive, these limitations are going to matter enormously. Pyrrhus sees this before he ever faces a Roman soldier. So he builds around the phalanx rather than relying on it alone. He integrates the thuriaphoroi, light infantry soldiers carrying large oval shields, javelins and short swords, into his formations. These men can operate on broken terrain, can fill gaps in the phalanx line, can function as a mobile reserve that the phalanx cannot provide for itself. He develops the Tarentine cavalry, light horsemen armed with javelins rather than the heavy lance of traditional Greek cavalry. Faster, more versatile, capable of harassing, screening, pursuing, and withdrawing in ways that heavy cavalry cannot manage. And he has the elephants, 20 Indian war elephants, acquired through his Egyptian connections. In the Western Mediterranean in 280 BC, no army has faced war elephants before. The Romans have heard of them. They have not seen them. They do not know how horses react to them, which is to say badly, and they do not yet have a tactical answer to a 4-ton animal in bronze armor walking through their formations. Pyrrhus knows this is a temporary advantage. The Romans are fast learners. He knows that once they've seen the elephants, they'll start working on a solution. But once is enough to win a battle. And he intends to win the first one decisively enough that the second one doesn't need to be fought at all. That calculation, as it turns out, is wrong. But it's a reasonable calculation. And it reveals something important about how Pyrrhus thinks, in tactical terms, in battle terms, in the logic of the engagement rather than the logic of the campaign. This is his great strength. It is also his great limitation. In 288 BC, an opportunity arrives that Pyrrhus cannot pass up. Demetrius Poliorcetes, the besieger of cities, the most spectacular and most unstable of all the Diadochi, the man who was once Pyrrhus's brother-in-law and then his enemy, has overreached. He has made himself king of Macedonia through violence and kept it through arrogance. His soldiers hate him. His subjects are exhausted. And Lysimachus of Thrace is moving in from the east. Pyrrhus moves in from the west. What happens next is one of the most remarkable bloodless victories in ancient military history. Pyrrhus marches his Epirote army to the border of Macedonia. Demetrius marches out to meet him. The two armies line up across a valley from each other. And then Demetrius's soldiers start crossing over to Pyrrhus's side. Not a few. Not deserters slipping away in the night. Whole units. Whole contingents. Thousands of Macedonian soldiers walking away from Demetrius and joining the man facing him. The sources are consistent on why Pyrrhus fights alongside his men. He is known to every soldier as the general who leads from the front, who sleeps in the same conditions as the troops, who distributes plunder generously. Demetrius is known as the general who builds himself a palace when he should be building an army. Demetrius retreats, then flees, then surrenders to the Seleucids and dies in captivity. Pyrrhus and Lysimachus divide Macedonia between them. Pyrrhus rules part of Macedonia for less than 2 years. Lysimachus, older and more experienced in the politics of Hellenistic kingship, outmaneuvers him diplomatically, applies pressure, picks away at Pyrrhus's Macedonian support. And eventually Pyrrhus, rather than fight a war he isn't certain he can win, retreats back to Epirus. This is something people miss about Pyrrhus. He is aggressive on the battlefield and often strategically patient off it. He knows when a position isn't worth the cost. That calculation too has its limits. But in 284 BC, facing Lysimachus with a weaker hand, it is the right call. He goes back to Epirus. He governs. He waits. Then Tarentum calls. Tarentum in 281 BC is a city in trouble that doesn't entirely know it yet. It is one of the wealthiest Greek colonies in the Mediterranean, a prosperous trading port on the heel of the Italian boot, with a magnificent harbor, a strong fleet, and a population accustomed to the comforts that come from 2 centuries of commercial success. What it doesn't have is an army capable of facing what is coming from the north. Rome is expanding. Has been expanding steadily for a generation. The Italian peninsula is being absorbed into Rome's system of alliances and subordinate relationships, city by city, tribe by tribe. Tarentum has watched this happen to its neighbors and told itself it was different, that its fleet made it untouchable, that some treaty would eventually protect it. Then, in 282 BC, a Roman flotilla enters the harbor of Tarentum in violation of a treaty that prohibited Roman warships in those waters. The Tarentines, at a festival, half-drunk and fully offended, attack the Roman ships. They sink several. They kill the sailors. They expel the Roman ambassador with public mockery. And then they realize what they have done. Rome does not negotiate with people who sink its ships and humiliate its ambassadors. There will be legions. So, the Tarentines need a general. Specifically, they need the best general available in the Greek world. Someone whose reputation alone might give Rome pause, and whose actual battlefield ability might back that reputation up. They send an embassy to Pyrrhus. The offer is generous. Tarentum will provide soldiers, money, supplies. Other southern Italian peoples, the Samnites, the Lucanians, the Bruttians, who all have their own reasons to fear Rome's expansion, will join the coalition. Pyrrhus will command. Pyrrhus listens. He thinks of Cineas's question. What prevents us from doing that right now? And then he starts calculating how many elephants he can fit on a transport ship. Because Italy is not just about helping Tarentum. Italy is the first step. Sicily after that. Carthage after Sicily. The plan he described to Cineas, the plan Cineas called pointless. He has been carrying it since that conversation, and he is not going to stop carrying it now that someone is offering to fund the beginning of it. He assembles the force. 20,000 infantry. 3,000 cavalry. 2,000 archers. 500 slingers. 20 war elephants. In 280 BC he sails. The crossing of the Adriatic does not go as planned. A storm hits the fleet somewhere in the open sea. Ships scatter. Men drown. 3 of the war elephants panic in their holds and have to be managed by mahouts working in total darkness on a rolling ship in the middle of a violent storm. Several transport ships are driven onto the Italian coast and break apart on the rocks. Others make it to shore but at the wrong location, 30 or 40 kilometers from where they were supposed to land. Pyrrhus arrives in Italy with roughly half of what he started with. No supplies. Scattered units. Damaged ships. He takes 2 days to reassemble what he has. He sends riders up and down the Italian coast to collect the survivors and redirect them to Tarentum. He inventories what is lost and what is salvageable. And then he starts preparing for the battle that is coming. Because Rome has heard he's arrived. And Rome is already moving. Next episode, Heraclea. Asculum. The phrase that gave its name to every victory that destroys the winner.